And I want to focus on 3 projects in South Florida just by example. The first is Port of Palm Beach in Palm Beach County. The second is Port Everglades in Fort Lauderdale. And then we have the Central Everglades planning project in Florida. Disappointed would be the minimal word I could use to express the fact that the chief's reports for Port Everglades and for SEP will not be completed in time for this next authorization. We've waited 18 years for a chief's report in Port Everglades, and I'll defer to Mr. Webster, and he'll tell you the history of SEP, because he worked on it when he was Speaker of the House in Florida. And what I want to say is not only are these projects very, very important for the economy of Florida, and of course SEP is very important not only for the economy but for our environment and our water resources, but both these projects have overwhelming popular support in the community and commitments for funding from the community. Port of Palm Beach, which I have, it's a split in our community in terms of support. There are some who are very much in support of it. The dredging, there's an expansion. There's some very vocal opposition, and there is, from what I know, no commitment for any matching funds from the community. And yet, of these 3 projects, the only project that we have a chief's report for is the one Port of Palm Beach, which is no commitment for funding from the community. So my question really is do you take into account either the community support of a project? Do you take into account the ability of a community to come forward and pay its share? And how does it matter to you at all what members of Congress communicate in regards to their what their stakeholders are thinking?
Ma'am, thank you for those questions. I'm familiar with all of these projects. I'm more familiar with SEP and Port Everglades than Palm Beach. Let me take your last question first. Congresswoman, absolutely, and we take very seriously the concerns of Congress. I mean, you are your elected constituents, representatives. You are more closely tied to them than we are, and so we do listen very closely. I think there's some misunderstandings associated with some of the concerns that have been expressed, and let me just kind of work my way through the 2 that I'm most familiar with. I'm not as familiar with Palm Beach. But to answer your other question about community support, there's 2 things that are required before I go to the specifics. The first is, before we can proceed with the feasibility study, we need a letter of support, an identified, viable, non-federal sponsor. Sometimes that non-federal sponsors, their ability to support a project changes over the course of the study, but for the most times that does not happen. The second thing we need is to proceed forward at later stages in the study is a federal cost-sharing agreement with the sponsor, and we would not get to a Civil Works Review Board if we didn't have gone through that process. With regard to the Central Everglades, we are very close. I have committed at the Civil Works Review Board that was held last week that we would have a continuation of our Civil Works Review Board not later than the end of June. So that we're just basically less than 2 months away from continuing the Civil Works Review Board. Once we continue the Civil Works Review Board, we will then move forward to state and agency review. Within about 3 months, we can expect a chief's report. So the project briefing done by the district was phenomenal, explained very clearly, an extremely complicated project, one of the most complicated projects that we've seen. But the truth is that there were some documentation issues that had to be addressed, and we really held the Civil Works Review Board before our review team had been able to complete their review. With regard to Port Everglades, you know, one of the I think frustrations that people sense, as was discussed earlier, the sense that we're moving goalposts. What generally happens when that perception is out there is the assumptions that we were planning on turn out not to be valid. And so when those assumptions change and are no longer valid, then we have to go back and address the new reality that confronts us, that does result in additional time, often results in additional costs, often results in changed requirements in order to get the study forward. And essentially that's what happened with the Port Everglades project.
Well, I thank you for your answer. Not that I'm happy with it.